The lawyer's office smelled like old books and lemon furniture polish, and I sat in a leather chair that squeaked every time I moved, while my brother Evan looked completely relaxed across the mahogany table. It was December 18th, exactly 2 weeks after we laid our parents to rest. The lawyer, a thin man in his 60s named Mr. Ellison, cleared his throat and opened a manila folder. He looked uncomfortable, which should have been my first clue that something was wrong. Mr. Ellison began, "Thank you both for coming today. I know this is a difficult time. Your parents updated their will approximately 8 months ago, and I'm here to walk you through the distribution of their estate." I nodded and reached for the glass of water in front of me. My hands were shaking slightly. Our parents died in a car accident the first week of December, a head-on collision with a semi-truck on Highway 52. The funeral was a blur of flowers and casseroles and people saying how sorry they were. Evan sat perfectly still, his expression neutral. Mr. Ellison continued, "The estate is valued at approximately $940,000. This includes the family home in Crescent Falls, which is appraised at $410,000, investment accounts totaling $370,000, life insurance policies of $100,000, and miscellaneous assets including vehicles and personal property." Almost $1 million. I felt dizzy. I knew my parents were comfortable, but I had no idea they'd accumulated that much. Dad worked as an operations manager at a manufacturing plant for 30 years. Mom was a school librarian. They lived modestly in the same house they bought in 1989. Mr. Ellison pulled out a document and slid it across the table. He stated, "The will is straightforward. I'll read the relevant section now." I watched him adjust his glasses. He read aloud, "I leave the entirety of my estate, including all properties, financial accounts, investments, and personal belongings, to my son, Evan Michael Hartley. To my daughter, Nora Jane Hartley, I leave my gratitude for her presence in our lives." The room went silent, except for the ticking of a clock somewhere behind me. I heard the words, but they didn't make sense. I waited for him to continue, to explain the part where my inheritance was mentioned. Mr. Ellison looked at me with something like pity. He added quietly, "That's the complete distribution. I'm very sorry, Miss Hartley." My gratitude? They left me their gratitude? Evan reached for the document and started reading it himself, his face completely blank. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look guilty or confused or concerned. He looked like he already knew. I found my voice, though it came out smaller than I intended. I asked, "There's nothing for me? Nothing at all?" Mr. Ellison shook his head slowly. He confirmed, "I'm afraid not. The will is very clear. The entire estate goes to your brother." I turned to Evan, waiting for him to say something, waiting for him to tell the lawyer this was wrong, that our parents must have made a mistake, that obviously we'd split everything 50-50 like any normal siblings would. Evan looked up from the document and met my eyes. He said simply, "Well, I guess that's settled then." That's settled. $940,000, and his only response was, "That's settled." I stood up so fast, the chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Mr. Ellison flinched. I stated, my voice shaking now, "This can't be right. There has to be a mistake. Why would they do this?" Mr. Ellison folded his hands on the table. He replied, "I asked your parents that same question when they made the changes last April. Your father said it was a family matter and didn't elaborate. I'm truly sorry. I know this must be shocking." Shocking didn't begin to cover it. I looked at Evan again. He was scanning the document like it was a restaurant menu, casual and detached. I demanded, "Did you know about this?" He finally looked up. Evan answered, "No, but I'm not surprised." Not surprised. I felt like I was going to throw up. I grabbed my coat and walked out of that office without another word. Behind me, I heard Mr. Ellison saying something about contesting the will, about legal options, but his voice faded as I pushed through the door into the cold December afternoon. The parking lot was dusted with snow. Christmas lights hung from the office building next door, blinking red and green. Someone had left a radio on in their car, and I could hear a muffled version of Silver Bells playing. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could even turn the key. My parents left me nothing. 33 years of being their daughter, and they left me nothing. I drove home to my apartment in Oak Ridge Valley, a small one-bedroom place I rented for $1,100 a month. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I worked as a quality assurance specialist for a food distribution company, which paid decently, but not amazingly. I had about $8,000 in savings and a used Honda Civic with 160,000 miles on it. Meanwhile, Evan just inherited almost $1 million. I called my best friend Harper as soon as I got inside. She answered on the second ring. Harper greeted, "Hey, how did it go with the lawyer?" I couldn't even speak for a few seconds. Harper's voice shifted immediately. She pressed, "Nora, what happened?" I managed to get the words out. I told her, "They left everything to Evan. The house, the money, all of it. I got nothing." Silence on the other end. Then Harper said something I'll never forget. She responded, "Are you actually surprised, though?" That question hit me like cold water. Because, no, I wasn't surprised. And that was the worst part. Growing up, Evan was always the favorite. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't something I imagined or exaggerated. It was a fact of life in our family, like the thermostat always being set to 68 degrees or Dad reading the newspaper at breakfast. Evan was born first, 3 years before me. He was the golden child from day one. When he brought home a B on a report card, my parents celebrated. When I brought home straight A's, they said, "Good job," and moved on to asking what Evan needed for his science project. When Evan played Little League, my parents attended every single game. They bought him new cleats, new gloves, a professional batting coach one summer. I played soccer for 6 years, and they came to maybe 4 games total. I wore hand-me-down cleats from a cousin and practiced alone in the backyard. When Evan wanted to go to a private high school because his girlfriend went there, my parents paid the $16,000 annual tuition without hesitation. When I asked if I could take AP classes that required extra fees, they said money was tight and maybe next year. Next year never came. Evan went to college at a state university, lived in the dorms, joined a fraternity, studied business administration. My parents paid for everything: tuition, housing, meal plans, even his fraternity dues. He graduated with 0 debt and a degree he never really used. I went to the same university 2 years later and lived at home to save money. I worked 25 hours a week at a campus bookstore to cover my expenses. My parents helped with tuition, but I paid for my own books, gas, food, everything else. I graduated with $18,000 in student loan debt that I just finished paying off last year. After college, Evan moved back home for a few months while he figured things out. A few months turned into 3 years. He paid no rent, he worked part-time at a gym, and spent his evenings playing video games in the basement. My parents cooked his meals and did his laundry, and never once asked him to contribute. I moved out at 23 and immediately started paying all my own bills. When my car broke down 6 months later and I needed $1,200 for repairs, I asked my parents for a loan. They said they couldn't afford it. 3 weeks after that, Evan got a brand new laptop for his birthday, $1,500. When I got engaged at 28 to a man named Colin, my parents offered us $2,000 toward the wedding. We were grateful. We planned a small ceremony and reception for 80 people. Evan got engaged a year later to a woman named Aubrey. My parents gave them $15,000 for their wedding. $15,000! They had a massive celebration at a country club in Pinehurst Grove with 200 guests, an open bar, and a live band. The floral arrangements alone probably cost more than my entire wedding. When I asked my mom why the difference, she looked genuinely confused by the question. My mother explained, "Well, Evan's the oldest, and Aubrey's family has certain expectations. We wanted to help them start their marriage right." I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled and said I understood. I always smiled and said I understood. Colin and I divorced 2 years later. It wasn't related to my family, but it didn't help that throughout our marriage, he watched my parents constantly prioritize Evan and started treating me like I deserved it somehow. Like maybe there was a reason my own parents didn't value me. That divorce was finalized 14 months ago, and I was still rebuilding my life. And now, this. Harper came over that evening with Thai food and a bottle of wine. We sat on my couch while I went through everything again, trying to make sense of it. Harper listened, and then she said something that made me pause. She asked, "Do you think Evan knew about the will before today?" I thought about his face in the lawyer's office, the lack of surprise, the casual way he read through the document. I admitted, "Yeah, I think he did." Harper took a sip of wine. She suggested, "You should talk to him. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe your parents had a reason." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe there was some logical explanation for why my parents cut me out completely. But deep down, I knew the truth. They did it because they loved Evan more. They always had. I texted Evan the next morning around 9. I wrote, "Can we talk about the will? I'm trying to understand what happened." He didn't respond for 6 hours. Finally, late that afternoon, he sent back a single sentence. Evan replied, "There's nothing to talk about. Mom and Dad made their decision." I stared at that text for a long time. Then I called him. It rang 4 times before he picked up. Evan answered, his voice flat. "What?" I kept my tone calm. I began, "I just want to understand why they did this. Did they say anything to you? Did something happen between us that I don't know about?" He sighed, annoyed. Evan responded, "Nora, I don't know. Maybe they figured I needed it more. I've got Aubrey and we're planning to buy a bigger house. You're single. You have a job. You're fine." I needed it more? I was the one who worked through college. I was the one who paid off my own debt. I was the one who never asked them for anything I didn't absolutely need. And I was fine? I pressed. "Evan, this is almost $1 million. Surely you can see how unfair this is." He laughed. Actually laughed. Evan shot back, "Unfair? Life's unfair, Nora. Get over it. Mom and Dad made their choice. It's done." Then he hung up. I sat there holding my phone, feeling something inside me shift from sadness to anger. Get over it. Almost $1 million, and he wanted me to just get over it? The next few days were torture. Christmas was a week away, and everywhere I looked there were reminders of family and togetherness and joy. My apartment felt smaller and lonelier than usual. I kept thinking about my parents, trying to remember if there were signs I missed, moments where I could have fixed whatever was broken between us. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized nothing was broken on my end. I was a good daughter. I called them every week. I visited for holidays. I sent cards. I asked about their lives. I helped Mom set up her new phone last year. I fixed Dad's computer when it got a virus. I loved them. And apparently, that wasn't enough. On December 23rd, Aubrey posted on social media. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The post was a photo of her and Evan standing in front of my parents' house in Crescent Falls. She was smiling, holding a set of keys. The caption read, "Can't believe this beautiful home is ours now. Evan's parents were so generous, feeling blessed this holiday season. #new homeowners, #family legacy, #blessed." I stared at that post until my vision blurred. They were already moving into the house. our childhood home, the place where I learned to ride a bike in the driveway and built snowmen in the front yard, and spent every Christmas morning opening presents by the fireplace. And Aubrey was calling it theirs. If you've ever been cut out of a family inheritance or watched a sibling get everything while you got nothing, let me know in the comments, because what I did next changed everything. I called Mr. Ellison the next morning. I stated, "I want to contest the will. Tell me what I need to do." Mr. Ellison sounded hesitant when he called me back later that afternoon on December 23rd. "Miss Hartley, I understand you're upset, but contesting a will is expensive and time-consuming. Your parents were of sound mind when they made these changes. Unless you can prove undue influence or lack of capacity, the court will likely uphold their wishes." I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook in front of me, already writing down everything I remembered about the last year of my parents' lives. What counts as undue influence? You'd need to prove that someone manipulated your parents into changing the will, that they were coerced or deceived. Do you have any evidence of that? I thought about Evan's face in the lawyer's office, the complete lack of surprise, the casual way he read through the document like he already knew every word. I think my brother knew about the will before they died. I think he might have influenced them somehow. If you truly believe that, you should gather any documentation you can, emails, text messages, phone records. But, Miss Hartley, I have to be honest with you, these cases are very difficult to win. I thanked him and hung up. Then I started digging. I went through every text message my parents sent me in the last 2 years. Most of it was mundane. Mom asking if I was coming to Sunday dinner, Dad sending me a recipe for chili. But then I found something from last March, about a month before they changed the will. My mother texted, "Evan mentioned you've been struggling financially. Why didn't you tell us? We would have helped." I stared at that message for a solid minute. Struggling financially? I wasn't struggling. I paid my bills on time. I had savings. I was doing fine. I had texted back immediately, asking what she meant. My mother responded, "Evan said you've been stressed about money, that you might lose your apartment. He's worried about you." I never told Evan I was struggling, because I wasn't. We barely even talked. I found another text from my father in April, right around when they would have been updating the will. "Your mother and I have been thinking about the future. We want to make sure our assets go where they'll do the most good. We love you, sweetheart." At the time, I thought it was just a random philosophical message. Now it felt like a warning I was too naive to understand. I called Harper within minutes. Evan lied to them. He told them I was struggling financially, that I might lose my apartment. None of that was true. Harper's voice went sharp. Why would he do that? So they'd cut me out, so they'd think he was the responsible one who needed their help, and I was the mess who couldn't handle money. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Didn't your parents visit you last spring?" I remembered instantly. They came to my apartment for dinner in late April. My mother kept looking around my apartment, asking questions about my job, my expenses, whether I was managing okay. At the time, I thought she was just being a concerned parent. Now I realized she was looking for evidence that I was struggling, evidence that Evan planted in her head. I spent Christmas Eve alone, but this time it felt different. I wasn't sad anymore. On Christmas morning, Aubrey posted another photo on social media. The living room, fully decorated with a massive tree covered in ornaments I recognized from my childhood. My grandmother's angel tree topper sitting at the peak. The caption read, "First Christmas in our new home, feeling so grateful for family and new beginnings. #blessed. I commented before I could stop myself. That was my grandmother's angel. Aubrey deleted the comment within 5 minutes and blocked me. The day after Christmas, I drove to Crescent Falls.
I parked across the street from my parents' house and just sat there, staring. Evan's truck was in the driveway next to Aubrey's white SUV. My phone buzzed with a text from Evan. Aubrey told me you commented on her post. Stop being creepy. Move on with your life. I typed back without thinking twice. Why did you tell Mom and Dad I was struggling financially? I never said that to you. Finally, he responded, I don't know what you're talking about. I called him right then. What? I kept my voice level. Last March, you told Mom I was struggling with money, that I might lose my apartment. Why did you lie to them? He laughed, but it sounded forced. I didn't lie. I was concerned about you. You're always complaining about bills and expenses. That wasn't true. We barely spoke. When did I ever complain to you about bills? We haven't had a real conversation in over a year. Silence. Then his voice changed completely, got colder. Look, Mom and Dad made their decision based on what they thought was best. If they believed I was more responsible with money, maybe that's on you. You manipulated them. You lied to make me look bad so they'd leave everything to you. Evan laughed. Prove it. Oh wait, you can't, because they're dead and the will stands. So get over it and stop harassing my wife. He hung up. I sat in my car for another 20 minutes, and I made a decision. I was going to fight this. I spent the next 2 weeks building my case. I gathered every text message from my parents. I printed out my bank statements showing I was financially stable. I contacted 3 of my parents' closest friends. One of them, a woman named Judith, who'd been my mother's book club friend for 20 years, told me something that confirmed everything. Your mother mentioned last spring that Evan was worried about you. She said he'd been checking in on you more, being a good brother. Checking in on me. Another lie. Judith continued. She said Evan told her you'd been missing work, that you were having trouble keeping up with responsibilities. She seemed really concerned. Missing work? I hadn't missed a single day except for the week I took off when my parents died. By mid-January, I had enough to take back to Mr. Ellison. He reviewed everything carefully. This is compelling evidence, Miss Hartley. If you can prove your brother deliberately misrepresented your financial situation with the intent to influence the will, you might have a legitimate case. What happens next? We file a petition to contest the will. We'll need to subpoena your brother's phone records and any communication he had with your parents around the time they changed their estate plan. I signed the paperwork that same afternoon. Evan was served with the petition 3 days later. He called me within an hour, screaming, "Are you actually insane? You're gonna drag our dead parents through court because you're jealous and bitter?" I stayed completely calm. I'm doing this because you lied to them. You manipulated them into cutting me out of their will, and I have proof. You have nothing. This is pathetic, Nora. You're going to lose. I smiled. We'll see about that. The legal process took months. Evan fought every single step, but his story kept changing. His phone records told a different story. In the 3 months before our parents changed their will, Evan called them 96 times. Before that period, he averaged maybe 8 calls per month. Evan was constantly feeding them concerns about me, telling them I was stressed, suggesting I was making poor decisions, planting seeds of doubt about my stability. The breaking point came during Evan's deposition in late April. My lawyer, Gretchen Vale, asked him directly about a specific text message. She read it aloud. This text from you to your father says, "I think Nora's in over her head financially. She won't admit it, but I'm worried she's going to crash hard. Maybe it's better if she doesn't have access to a lot of money right now. Did you send this?" Evan's face went bright red. That was taken out of context. What context would make it appropriate to suggest to your father that your sister shouldn't receive an inheritance? He couldn't answer. The judge reviewed all the evidence during a hearing in early June. She looked up and directly at Evan. "I find sufficient evidence of undue influence in this case.
The respondent engaged in a deliberate and sustained pattern of deception specifically designed to manipulate the decedent's testamentary decisions. The will dated April 2024 is hereby invalidated. The estate will be distributed according to the previous will from 2019, which divides all assets equally between both children. I couldn't breathe for a second. I won. Evan stood up so fast his chair fell backward. He stormed out of the courtroom without looking at anyone. The final settlement took another 6 weeks. Evan had to sell the house. We split the proceeds down the middle. We split everything exactly 50-50, the way it should have been from the beginning. My half came to $463,000. Evan didn't speak to me during the entire settlement process. On the day we both signed the final paperwork, I saw him in the parking lot. He looked older, tired, and angry. He saw me and stopped for just a moment. I thought maybe he might finally apologize. Instead, he got in his truck, slammed the door, and drove away. I never saw or heard from him again. With my inheritance money, I bought my own house in a small town called Meadowshire, a beautiful 3-bedroom house with a backyard full of apple trees and a front porch where I could sit and drink coffee every morning. I quit my job and enrolled in school to get a degree in landscape architecture, something I'd always wanted to do but could never afford. For the first time in my life, I was living on my own terms. Harper came over the day I moved in. She brought champagne and Chinese takeout, and we sat on my empty living room floor surrounded by boxes. She raised her glass to Nora, who fought for what she deserved and actually won. We clinked our glasses together, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I thought about my parents sometimes, wondered if they would have been proud of me for fighting back, but mostly I tried not to wonder at all. Because the truth was simple. They made their choice. They chose Evan the same way they always had. And even though he manipulated them, they were willing to believe his lies because it fit the narrative they'd been telling themselves for 33 years. I was the backup child, the spare, the one who would always be fine no matter what. And you know what? In a weird way, they were right about one thing. I was fine. Better than fine, actually. I was free. I planted rose bushes in my backyard that spring, pink ones, because I'd always loved pink and there was nobody around anymore to tell me they preferred red or yellow. I bought furniture that I actually liked. I adopted a dog from the local shelter, a sweet golden retriever mix named Biscuit, who followed me from room to room like I was the most important person in his entire world. I built a life that was completely and entirely mine. My parents left everything to my brother in their will, but I took back what was rightfully mine. And in the process, I learned the most important lesson of my life. I was worth fighting for. I just had to be the one willing to do it.